Now, tensions remain high in the Korean peninsula. This as North Korea fired 2 more ballistic missiles off its east coast. Kim Jong-un's sisters warned US forces to halt military drills, threatening to turn the Pacific into a firing range. Japan's defense ministry too has confirmed that 2 ballistic missiles fell outside its exclusive economic zone. To discuss the reasons and the impact of the growing tensions here, we're now being joined by Sooyoung, defense correspondent at Arirang TV, joining us live from Seoul. Thank you so much for joining us right now.
Thank you so much for having me.
My first question to you, Pyongyang launched 2 more ballistic missiles off its east coast, as I mentioned. This appears to be in response to the joint drills of the US along with South Korea and Japan. To begin with, what do you think has led to the growing tensions in the region?
Well, you have to remember that the growing tensions are largely due to the escalation of tensions by North Korea. They launched an unprecedented number of missile shots in a year last year, and they've been continuing. The missile shot this morning, on Monday morning here in the south, it was their 3rd round of provocations this year. The second one having come on Saturday, just over the weekend. That was an ICBM, which they hadn't been testing for about 3 months. So the reason why South Korea and the United States have been scaling up their military drills is because the North has been just launching these provocations. And you have to remember that these military drills, they were actually regular drills that Seoul and Washington were holding before the previous Moon Jae-in government decided to scale back and also halt them for about 5 years. Since 2017, because he was hoping for peace on the Korean peninsula, but obviously that didn't work out, and the North is very much set on increasing its nuclear and missile capabilities. It's declared itself a nuclear state.
Now, on the other hand, joint drills by South Korea, United States and allies, what can you tell us of the implications of those?
Well, as for South Korea, the United States and also Japan joining in this trilateral cooperation, they've pledged to strengthen their response. Over the weekend, the foreign ministers of Seoul, Washington and Tokyo, they met, they kind of gathered together in an emergency sort of discussion at the Munich Security Conference, and they condemned the North for its recent actions. And over the last few months, they've continuously discussed ways to increase information sharing, other kinds of methods to really strengthen deterrence against North Korea's growing threats to regional peace and stability. So you will see more and more combined efforts by South Korea, the United States and Japan.
Right, absolutely. As per reports, Kim Yo-jong has also threatened to turn the Pacific into a firing range. What exactly does this imply, and how do you see this altering the international order?
Well, that statement was that was quoted actually by North Korean media. North Korean regime leader Kim Jong-un's sister Kim Yo-jong is supposed to have said that statement, but it's the usual kind of statement she would give. She doesn't hold back when it comes to making those kind of very acerbic statements, and she's said similar things before. This time it was no different, but what is quite different though is that North Korean media, it seemed very ready, very eager to put out those statements and put out these reports about its 2 ballistic, short-range ballistic missile launches this morning. They published stories on their state media with quite unprecedented speed, actually, which also included this statement by Ms. Kim. So it's nothing to be largely surprised by, but we can probably expect more provocations on the way, as North Korea it strongly opposes South Korea and the United States' upcoming joint military drills, and Pyongyang also has some key state anniversary events coming up in April.
All right. And just for more clarity here, to understand this better, how do you assess the role of the United States here?
Well, the role of the United States is obviously working with its allies, mainly South Korea and now Japan too, of course, in countering this growing escalation, this growing provocation by North Korea. And the role of the US, of course, has been central throughout the decades in deterring North Korea, because the US offers its allies a policy called extended deterrence, which means that Washington is going to come to the aid of its allies if it's if its ally falls under conventional or nuclear attack. So the allies, they do trust in this, but they want to see this really move into action, or see how this is going to move into action. And that's why there have been growing discussions in recent weeks and months about how the allies are going to strengthen the credibility of extended deterrence. And that's exactly what they've been trying to do. And military officials have told us this morning that they are implementing some of these measures, like information sharing, and they are trying to increase these kind of interactions and cooperation between South Korea, the United States, and Japan.
All right. Now, Seoul's foreign ministry announced sanctions on 4 individuals and 5 entities linked to Pyongyang's weapons programs on Monday as well. How effective do you think these will prove to be?
Well, the North Korean economy has been suffering immensely over the past few years. It marked 2 straight years of decline following the shutdowns due to COVID-19 from 2020, 2021. And North Korean leader Kim Jong-un himself, he admitted to having failed to reach economic goals last year. So it's very bad news for the North Korean economy. And as you mentioned, the Foreign Minister Park Jin, he called for a stronger sanctions regime by the International Committee. His colleagues, his counterparts of the United States and Japan also stood along with him in calling for this during their trilateral kind of meeting in Munich. So these sanctions, of course, there have been many sanctions that the US has imposed, UN Security Council resolutions, and South Korea's individual sanctions as well, and these are going to bite.
All right. Now, going forward, as per some experts, tensions are likely to remain high. South Korea and the United States are set to hold simulated nuclear tabletop exercises aimed at improving operations of American nuclear assets this week, and this annual springtime Freedom Shield field training as well, which will happen in March. So what would you say is the aim of these exercises, and what sort of a response can we expect from North Korea on this?
So North Korea always likes to use these regular drills against its own provocations as a pretext to increase its escalation of its nuclear or missile provocations, basically. And what these exercises that South Korea and the United States are intended to do are basically to prevent war. They are to stop North Korea from causing havoc on the Korean peninsula. So they are quite defensive in nature. The springtime Freedom Shield exercises, they're computer simulated exercises, and they're actually defense oriented. And the tabletop exercises that you mentioned coming up, they were actually held, they're supposed to be held on an annual basis, but they've been halted for about 5 years. These will resume due to obvious needs, because North Korea has been so aggressive and belligerent over the past year, and they've constantly been issuing nuclear threats. They claim to be a nuclear state. They show no kind. So that's why these tabletop exercises will be held this week on Wednesday in Washington at the Pentagon.
All right. Sooyoung, thank you so much for joining us with all your insights on this.
All right. Thank you for having me.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.